Jim. There he is.
I just want to continue a little bit on that same paper. I'm not completely clear about the relationship between Taiwan, let's say the trade state operation, and the mainland, the imperial order. Because I'm wondering, like, if you think, I hate to bring this up, but this looks, it looks like a parallel between the relationship between empires and ports of trade.
Right.
And and I'm wondering if there is that kind of relationship.
It is like an empire and a port of trade. And one thing that I didn't have time to mention is that the Qing dynasty tried to wipe out the Zhang regime in Taiwan. They have a scorched earth policy to move all villages inland to depopulate the coastal area, but the Zhang people managed to maintain this kind of smuggling networks, penetrating deep into inland to smuggle silk and ceramics and all the things out to Taiwan. So basically they are, and also the Qing Empire cannot totally kill the trade because they need the silver. So in the end, that they just tolerate some kind of trade going on controlled by the Zhang, and then the Zhang, though politically still technically at war with mainland China, so they monopolize the flow of silver into China and then flow of goods out of China. So it is a kind of a port of trade. And its revenue of the Zhang state rely totally on trade revenues rather than agrarian taxation.
Is that because of the Europeans? Because
they learn from
because the silver is coming from
the Europeans.
Going to a particular place.
Yeah, from the Manilas at that time, because Japan already cut off the export, so you have to go. This is why they are talking about not invading Indonesia and things, but mostly invading Philippines because it is where the silver came from.
Sort of leads to the question of why China never did invade the Philippines. Because you think Ming or Qing would have wanted it.
The Zhang regime wanted to invade it. It has the capability, but then the Ming and the Qing didn't have the capability. And then even when the Qing Empire talking about expedition to invade Taiwan at that time, there's a huge amount of hesitation in the port because they are not sure whether their ships can survive in Taiwan Strait. So what about Philippines? And then it was the impulsion that led them to incorporate Taiwan. They didn't never have a real expedition like this because they really don't have the navigation and labor, and only the Zhang mastered this skill.
But there was enormous sea trade with Southeast Asia throughout this whole period with huge ships.
But it is Zhang whole area. And then later on, it's kind of a close to the coast kind of small ships. And the Europeans.
Yes, we know that Southeast Asia acted as an interface, in fact, around 500 BC between China and the Indian Ocean. There is another interesting site in Kaohsiung. So I have a question to Chu about Sungai Bat. Do you know that the island, where does it come from? Is it a Chinese influence or Indian influence?
They have not, but the iron ore itself was from local. But if you look at the site, it is on the northwestern Malay Peninsula, and therefore it's less likely. But iron was already discovered in mainland Southeast Asia, smelting of iron much earlier than that. And so the suspicion is that they were making it primarily shooting to eastern South Asia. But they had they call it Tourier, where you blow into the furnace whereby the iron is made. And so I assume that, but there is never an attempt for them to compare whether there's any transfer from China to or India.
You could probably tell from the structure of the furnaces. Kilns.
Yeah, but they are so busy just trying to see what's going on, and
I just want to talk to Victoria for a minute. I'm sympathetic to the research you're doing and all, but it sounds like you've got a classification struggle going on about statements. And it's not just about East Asia, it's about, because you want to compare with the West. So whatever you do, it has to be comparable. I understand that, but I'm not entirely convinced that it's necessary to make the distinction between interstate war and wars between states and non-states. And that would be a problem in both the East and the West. And so why not just do it the Lorino way and just look at all relatively large-scale conflicts? And don't worry about whether you want to call it a state or not. I mean, whatever those things are they're doing as their colonies, they may not be that big, but you could count them too. I'm talking about your problem of data and research and so on. You know, I'm thinking that maybe you could do kind of what Tom Hall and what Peter were saying. You know, it needs to be need to make comparable decisions about classification, but at the data gathering stage, you don't. You just look at all large-scale conflicts, and then you either ignore the issue about what is really a state or not, or you do it in the same way in locales. Wouldn't that solve your problem?
Yeah, the question is, was China peaceful? Not was there interstate violence?
No, it's whether it was more peaceful or less than the West. That's the question.
Right. You can compare whether the perpetrators are states or not.
Chris? There's a discussion reminded me of something that I cut out at the time. You have to keep in mind a very important distinction. The fight between the state and one peripheral area or one set of, and this is really important for China because it has such huge inland borders versus its conflicts with all the barbarians around there. Because where one group won't necessarily, unless it's Mongols, won't knock them off, but if they're fighting everybody, they'll make the state go broke. But because they report it as this little tribe, this little tribe, this little tribe, they don't see it as a big fight, when in fact it is a huge fight.
In fact, I give my answer to the question. You know why I bother with this is because of my interest. You know, my purpose is not just to compile a data set of large-scale conflict. That's essentially, I almost can just, because my focus is really qualitative history. And my argument is exactly that China, whenever it was unified, repeatedly would want to conquer the periphery. So the interior itself was more often divided than unified. But whenever the interior was unified, repeatedly it would want to conquer. And then they would, so what are the checking mechanisms? Balance of power and rising cost of expansion. I'm applying essentially the same theoretical framework that I developed for the Warring States period to look at the rest of Chinese history. Repeatedly, they really did not have money to sustain any long-term campaigns. So they were defeated by their own limits in resources. And so because that is really what I want to do, in a way, the reason why I'm kind of, for all these years, I tried to basically incorporate this data set into my book, and I decided this is not going to work because I'd rather just get my qualitative research out and then set that aside. But if it's just the data set itself, I don't even know if I want to do it. So that's another problem, is that there's basically a theoretical question that I want to ask, and that's my theoretical focus is state formation, and that's why.
Well, there's all kinds of interesting things about, the Central Asian regimes could always manage China and frequently conquer China. And of course they can do it because they weren't just a bunch of nomads running around loose. The nomads, whenever they wanted to start an empire, would promptly conquer the nearest oases so they could get a reliable supply of forage and food and grain and metal and stuff. Not only after they conquered the Central Asian Silk Road oases would they try to China, which is why China had to constantly go in there and try to conquer these Silk Road oases themselves. They were stuck.
And in a way though, so the oasis towns, they, again, the idea is that, we have these nomadic regimes, they were not just nomadic. Because the entire steppe zone had nomadic societies, at the same time there were also these, basically the oasis states, they were really settled states, they were agricultural. Even today, they like a lot of these towns in Xinjiang, they are agricultural. And so, because they were really prosperous, and therefore, from the Han Dynasty on, they wanted to control that route. And essentially, both for territorial control and commercial benefits. But they repeatedly failed. One, they were defeated by actually, the Mongols and the Sholu. But later, but more importantly, it was really expensive. So the point that it's really difficult. The Central Asia barrier was just immense. It was not surmountable until the Hai Qing. And they could do that because of silver, because actually the Qing economy was then incorporated into the world economy. They had a lot more money. They were selling all this China ware to Europe and getting so much more money. And they also could begin to then mobilize all the resources they could get from Europe. And also weapons, modern weapons. The Jesuits would bring along the Jesuits who would make cannons on the spot.
Yeah.
So it was only in the Hai Qing that China could control and dominate the entire swath of Central Asia and become today's China.
Yeah, you had to have firearms because otherwise you were up against numbered guys with 200-pound full compound bows. Chinese couldn't touch them.
I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Bard's book, Imperialist Frontier covers a lot, but there's one thing, again, I sort of skipped over. When you talked about sometimes the army went out and disappeared. What was going on, the pastoralists were really good at this. They essentially would come up where the Chinese were, drop their trowel and moon them, and then run away, and then they keep acting like they're starving to fall out, and the army keeps following and following until it gets cut off from its supply lines. Then the real rest of the group comes in behind and just murders them all.
Yeah.
And that's why those armies disappeared. And it doesn't take too many of those before generals say, no, I don't want to go out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then the funny thing that is they repeatedly forgot about it. It's like every single dynasty had to relearn the lesson again. And this is why, in a way that my gut feeling is that China really would look relatively peaceful. However, I compile, whether I can state actors or non-state actors or no matter what, because they just did not have the ability. China is just, quote unquote, China is just so huge, and at the same time they tax, even just taxing the populations for maintenance, normal maintenance, was already way too high. And whenever there was a war, they had to, every time there was a war, they had to actually mobilize extra additional taxes and also conscript laborers. They couldn't do it.
Yeah, I just want to continue a little bit on that, and it's more in the form of a question, that as I understand, the old histories of China always talk about periods of centralization and decentralization. So these warring states, they pop up all the time. And I would think that, just in statistical terms, that in the warring states period, you find a lot more local warfare and less, let's say, around the periphery. And I'm just wondering about if there's a cycle that's involved in. That's the first question. The second question is what is in other words, there's a cultural aspect of this, is that why does the state represent itself as peaceful? And that's an interesting kind of phenomenon, right? I think. In other words, they're stressing a certain aspect of the existence of the populations which they govern, and maybe which they don't really govern, in order to present a certain image to themselves, I imagine, because they're not doing this for the rest of the world. So I'm wondering what this is all about.
I am not sure if that really is a puzzle, because, even when I talk to a lot of my students at Notre Dame, they believe that, again, a lot of professors who tend to be left-wing liberal and then tend to be a lot more critical of U.S. foreign policy. But you also have a lot of Americans who just honestly believe that the U.S. is peaceful. So the belief that we are peaceful, those guys are evil, I think it's quite universal, so I'm not sure if that is a puzzle. And at the same time, then another thing is that it's earlier also said that, if David Cameron wants to find the intent of conquest, you're not going to find any. There's not going to be any evidence, because we go there to pacify, to bring peace and order to people. Those are rebels, they have just to be put down. So there's always this urge to legitimize everything you do. But again, that is not very Chinese. You don't need to resort to Chinese culture. Bush said that he went to Iraq to promote peace and freedom. So again, it's a very universal thing. But so when it comes to the focus on local wars versus wars with the periphery, again, that's the local. What is local? So when China went, as I said, even the interior itself, interior China, without looking at Central Asia, so what I'm talking about, the entire circle from Manchuria through Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Yunnan and Guizhou Plateau, that entire area, I exclude all of that. So I'm just looking at the interior with the river valleys. Even that area, in my counting, if I look at effective rule, not just the claim, was more often divided than unified throughout the entire span of Chinese history. So what do you mean by local wars? Are these civil wars?
You just
Or,
answered
or these are really actually, they call themselves kingdoms.
Yeah.
And they are not subject to anyone.
Well, I'm thinking of it in terms of the let's say, the external understanding of the Chinese territory, you could say, which includes that whole area. You're not focusing on a much smaller sector of it.
Yeah, see, this
And even
is,
within that, it's very divided.
so the tentative title of my current book is What is Quote and Unquote China? So I'm going to be banned, but in any case, so exactly the point is that we should not take a retrospective view of history and then project from what we see today back to 2,000 years ago. China, I like to say that we never expanded because, China's always looked the same. No.
And, let me jump in to defer the cover a little bit by a quick comment. I agree with Victoria that this kind of a construction of China as a peaceful thing. I suspect most of it is 20th century construction by the nationalists when they are fighting against Western imperialism. And also, because I spent a lot of time in the Qing archive in the Forbidden City, and in the Qing dynasty there's a glorification of military conquest and military culture. And of course there's some kind of racism against Han people. The Manchu keep saying that the Han people only like poetry and good food and women, and they don't fight, so don't mingle with them. So they keep the imperial army, the Mongols and Manchus, and there's huge literature about how the emperor was great by conquering all these places. So this is a military culture. And then when the Han restored the Han majority rule and things like that, so they incorporate that racialist discrimination by the Manchus as we are peaceful people, and talking to the Europeans and saying, why you invade us, we are always peaceful. So it is this confluence of this kind of anti-Manchus and 20th century nationalist reconstruction, so it is in which was.
But even the Manchu court would justify everything they did.
Yeah.
Legitimate and rightful.
Yeah.
You can see, every time the Chinese did not have a forward policy in Central Asians came and zapped them. I mean, the Khitan did it, the Jin did it, the Mongols did it, the Manchu did it, everybody did it. So they had to maintain a forward policy. The other thing that's always fascinated me is how they would call all these guys a bunch of barbarians who rode around on horses and had no fixed address. And that sometimes led them into making stupid decisions, like the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu may have been nomads somewhere out there, but their power, their heavy population and wealth was all in the agricultural lands of what is now Shanxi and Gansu. And so, of course, it was almost impossible for Han Wudi to conquer them, because they had a huge agricultural base, which at that time was much warmer and wetter than it is now. So it was really low.
But again, so like today, for example, China says that we have to go to Southeast Asia because that's our land. That's our territory. We have to go defend our territory. So whether a particular military action is defensive or offensive, it depends on the perspective. So it is perfectly understandable why, for someone who sits in Beijing or from Xi'an or Beijing would think that all we are doing is very defensive because those guys are threatening us. But if you ask the guys sitting in Central Asia, then they would think that it is the Chinese empire that was aggressive.
Yeah.
So I don't even want to get into this debate, whether this is offense or defense.
It's the same with Europe. Erica Fox Brindley's new book on Europe is really cool about how the Qin dynasty general, when Qin fell, he just went down and conquered Europe and took over. And what the Europe had to say about it is not recorded.
We gotta start a break. It's 2:30. Let's do it. We got 15 minutes.